high school painting, I am going to go over to you how to create your watercolor technique chart. In this chart, you are going to learn how to make 12 different techniques using watercolor brushes and various skills that you can use for our upcoming watercolor unit. The first thing you'll need to do is get a watercolor paper from the red folder that should already be prepared for you. The next thing you're going to do is make sure your name is on the back, and then we are going to start to measure out your chart first. We are going to just make this a simple column chart, so the first thing I'm going to do is place the ruler and make the halfway mark between 9 inches, and it's about 4.5 right there, so I'll make a tick mark on the top and then across the bottom as well, and then connect those using my ruler. I am next going to make 2-inch marks up and down my paper for what will be my sections to paint in. Alright, so take my ruler, and if it's easier to put your paper horizontal like I'm doing, go ahead and do that. And I'm going to make a mark at every 2 inches. Make sure that your ruler is actually on the line part and not on the edge of the ruler, or you won't be accurate. And so I'm going to mark at the 2, the 4, the 6, 8, 10, and then I'm going to do the same across the bottom part of my paper. I'm going to move the camera up here, so pardon the shakiness so that you can see my full paper here. There, that's a little bit better. Okay, so now that I have done that, I'm going to just line up my ruler with those tick marks, and then I can draw down to make my sections for each technique. Hopefully you have finished your triptych painting if you are on this project and you are ready for our watercolor unit. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is label these. Alright, so please pay attention carefully so that you get all the labels in there correctly. The first one is going to be solid wash. The next one is going to be a gradient wash or a graded wash. Same idea, which means a wash from light to dark basically. I'm going to experiment with some wet on wet watercolor so that you can see the various techniques that you get with that. And then dry brush watercolor. Next one is called scumbling. It's a funny word. Then I'm going to do lift or blot technique next to that. The next area will be my mask area, where you will be using masking tape and seeing the effect that can give us with watercolor. Salt, scrape, and then we are going to use different brushes. When you use watercolor, you're going to see the brush mark way more than when you do acrylic. So I want you to try with a flat brush, a round brush, and a fan brush, and I will show you each of those. Okay, so if you have it all labeled like this, then you are ready to start. Okay, make sure that you get we're just going to use the basic watercolor paints, the little elementary packets for today. We will be using specialized watercolor for high school when we move on to the units, but this is all you really need for today. Okay, then you will need a bucket of water and the following brushes. This would be a flat brush. This is a size 10. You can use a different size. This is a fan brush, and this is a round tip brush. Okay, and I will be using the round tip brush for most things. So the first thing I'm going to do to make a solid wash, all I'm going to do is select a color. For example, let's try red. Those of you who have used watercolors before know that they are actually dry once you first get them out from the evaporated, and then once you add the water and create small gentle little circles on the pigment, you will pick up the pigment and you can transfer it to your paper. So a solid wash is just simply that. If I'm doing red, I just want to try and make that space be a solid red color. You might want to get a messy mat. So for a graded wash then, I am going to try and go from light to dark with a color. So I'm going to go ahead and use blue. A graded wash works better with a darker color, like blue, purple, green. Okay, so I'm going to start with what should be a darker blue, and I am going to try and lighten that blue as I go across this paper. And there's a variety of ways to do that. Adding more water to my brush will lighten the pigment. Okay, and as you can see, I can pull it across. Now, there's quite a separation there between the dark and the light, so I'm going to pick up a little more pigment and just try and take a clean brush and pull that pigment over so that it gradually goes from my dark to my light, not so stark. I should have a nice like medium light blue and then a very, very, very light blue. And if you need more variety, get another layer of that darker blue on there and use less water as well. That would be another way for you to get a darker color. Okay? And as you can see, you need to fill most of the area. If you have a couple of edges that aren't filled, that's fine, as long as I can see you've experimented with the technique. All right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 12 spaces, so it's going to be 2 points per space. It'll be 24 points completed. Now, wet on wet, I'm just going to pick a color, and you need to do this sort of quickly. So get your color prepared by pre-wetting it with your brush. I'm going to do yellow and orange. So I have both colors prepared, and I'm just going to paint that area quickly with yellow. And while it is still wet, I'm going to pick up some red and just dab it on there. Okay? And if the area dries too quickly for you and you still didn't do some of it, I can go ahead and re-wet it and then apply that second color. And as you can see, I did a darker color on top of a lighter color. And hopefully you can see that the color sort of bleeds out into that background color and creates an interesting effect. Okay? And so that is something we may use on your upcoming paintings depending on what sort of look you want. Dry brush is just that. I'm using my round tip brush. I'm going to dry it off almost completely. I'm just going to take a color that I've already kind of pre-wetted, the blue, and I'm just going to paint with that. So there's still a tiny bit of water on my brush, otherwise I wouldn't be able to pick anything up, but it's very, very little. And just experiment with some swiping, and you can see how that would be good for, possibly grass, something that would be a little bit sharp-edged in your picture. Scumbling is really good for trying to get the feeling of earth or tree branches or piles of leaves all together. Rather than painting each individual leaf, we paint the texture of the leaf. So I'm going to use green and blue and yellow to show you that idea. So I am just going to move my brush around in sort of scattered patterns. And if your brush starts to dry out, you need to dip it back into the water. You will definitely need to do that more often with watercolor than you have with acrylic. So they are just kind of sporadic. Now I'm going to pick up some blue and just layer that over top. Okay, and it's similar to the wet on wet, but I'm not painting a solid background. I am painting very sporadically to build up some texture. And I could put yellow on top. Again, make sure you wash out your brush really well, and I'm wiping it on the paper towel. And then I can layer some yellow on top. So you can see how that would be a good way to build up the look of a grassy area or a bush or something that like a treetop. Okay, the lift blot. I'm going to use purple this time. And again, with this one, you want to work kind of quickly. Make sure that you get a little piece of paper towel. You don't need any more than like just this little bit here. I'm going to get my purple prepared, and I'm going to paint it down into that section. And again, the key here is to be quick. And if it dries too much, then just go ahead and paint it again. Okay, so as this is wet, I'm going to take a crumpled up piece of paper towel, and I'm going to try and press it down to lift up my watercolor. Okay, and this particular type of watercolor paper is absorbing things very, very, very quickly. So I'll try a little bit different technique here. Your goal is to lift it up off the paper. So here's another one that I've done, and you can see that right there. It didn't work as well on that one, but you just pick it up and it sort of is a nice look for like clouds. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is the masking tape one, and with that you're just going to place some masking tape down like so, and then paint around it. Once it's dry, you peel the masking tape up, and then you can see how the masking tape has protected that paper from the pigment. Okay, then I'm going to do salt. And again, with the salt, you will have to work really quickly. I'm going to take a little bit of the blue pigment, and the salt is just right over by your painting materials. And I'm going to place that on there, and as quickly as I place that pigment, I'm going to sprinkle some salt. I mean, you have to do it almost instantly because this watercolor paper is just very, very absorbent. Okay, now you won't see a whole lot until it completely dries. But you can see that the salt is on there, and what you might be able to see when you do it is the salt is going to attract the water molecules, and therefore it will leave some different marks on your paper because the pigment has left the areas where the salt is. Okay, so it'll leave an interesting speckled kind of a look. It's really good for doing stars or a universe type of a idea. Okay, then the scrape. I'm going to take another color. Let's try green this time, because this would also be a really good one for doing grass. I'm going to apply some green very quickly, and then you are going to, while it's still wet, take the tip of your brush, the end of your brush, and actually scratch into that pigment. Don't scratch so hard that you put a hole in your paper, but hopefully you can see how that gives me some texture. And maybe if I add a little bit of blue, and now I can scratch into the blue even, and it removes the blue, leaving the green underneath. So this is just another technique that you can use when we are painting with watercolor to get different effects. Okay, so you can see it there a little bit better. Okay, next thing I want to do is now I'm going to experiment with my brushes, so my flat brush. And I want you to see that when we use these, we are just going to lay them down and kind of let the brush do its job. We're not going to really move it around or anything. We're just going to let the brush leave the print it would naturally leave. Okay, so I'm holding my flat brush horizontally, and I'm pressing and then pulling it up. Okay, and if you get too much paint on there, you're not going to see the brush as well. So if you're not being satisfied with what sort of prints you're leaving, go ahead and dry your brush off a little bit, and then pick up a little bit more pigment so that you see the brush itself. So now these last ones I've done are a little bit more interesting because I'm pressing it and then I pull it up like that. These would be really good if you were like painting a night sky or like a cityscape, and it would be a way you could make windows. It would be a way you can make scales. Lots of other uses that you can probably think of. Okay? But in watercolor, you try to use the brush to give you your shape sometimes. You don't always have to paint the shape itself. Okay? All right, so the round brush is really good for doing like raindrops, leaves, other sort of organic things. So let's go ahead and do blue since we were talking about raindrops. So again, I got my brush. I kind of dry it off a little bit, holding it horizontally for this paper. And I'm just going to press it and pull it up. And you can see it leaves definitely like a leaf sort of a shape. So if you are completed with your project, and you are done with your visual journals and you've uploaded things to Artsonia, this is what you should be working on so that you are ready for our watercolor unit. Okay, the next brush is the fan brush, and we haven't used these that much because they're really nice, but people tend to use them the wrong way. You don't use them as a brush. We use them as almost more of a stamp sort of a tool. Okay, and possibly to blend a little bit. So I'm going to pick up some blue again just because that one's ready to go. And when you pick this up on your palette, just be careful you don't make a huge mess. I'm just lightly tapping the top of the fan brush on there. Okay, and you can practice with this horizontally if you would like. And as you can see, it just leaves a really interesting mark. That would be really good, again, for some bushes, some leaves, tops of trees, possibly waterfalls. And hopefully you can see that it really gives us a nice gradient because we're just pressing it like a stamp. So I have a nice dark to light blue sort of fan out on the edges there. Okay, so this is what you should be doing. If you're done, please put it on the drying rack, and then you'll need to store it in your folder until I return and we get started on this.